you help me figure out what the aliens are saying, I'll let you keep him. Okay, but the minute he becomes a distraction...
He won't. Pinky promise.
The story keeps moving forward with Wendy coming to in the middle of the lab, but almost right away she realizes something's off. She can't hear a damn thing around her. The scientist watching over her step in and confirms she's dealing with a temporary loss of hearing, a side effect Arthur himself already ruled was part of the treatment he chose to put her through. Right then, Kirsch cuts in, reminding everybody that Wendy once told him she'd heard some weird noises whenever she got close to the xenomorph, a strange phenomenon that popped up again just last night, right when she pulled that embryo out of the isolation chamber. Sylvia, clearly intrigued, leans in and asks if that has any kind of link to the creatures. Kirsch explains it ain't all of them, just one in particular. That's when Cavalier storms into the room, strutting with his new favorite by his side, Curly. Kirsch tries to fill him in on Wendy's condition, but Cavalier, cocky as ever, cuts him off, reminding him he's always a step ahead. He already knows all the details of what went down. That's why he orders Kirsch to keep pushing the research on the creatures inside the lab. With the same sharp tone, he directs Sylvia to follow along too, but Sylvia straight up refuses to leave Wendy's side, insisting she's staying close while the girl's this shaken. Faced with her pushback, Cavalier lays into her with this cold, sharp tone, reminding her she ain't her mother and that she still owes him a full report on the hybrid's performance. Once he's got the room to himself, Cavalier settles down to work in peace, but that calm don't last long. Joe shows up. Cavalier introduces himself all formal, then slips in this not-so-subtle reminder that Joe's still under his thumb, working for a subsidiary that belongs to his own empire. With a smirk, he asks, almost mocking, how Joe's new lung is treating him. Then dripping with even more cynicism, he dares Joe to guess what kind of fate his original organ ended up facing. Joe don't take the bait. He ignores the cheap shots and locks all his focus on his sister. Wendy, raising her voice just to be heard, tells him straight she got hurt by something inside the lab. The words hit Joe hard, and in that heavy silence that follows, he pieces it together. Cavalier's sitting on a sample of those xenomorphs. After that reveal, Cavalier flips Wendy's hearing back on. Once Arthur checks she ain't suffering any permanent damage, he calmly asks her to lay out exactly what went down. Wendy explains that on that night, while Sylvia was still asleep, she jolted awake in terror after hearing a sound like insects rubbing their legs together in the dark. Following that strange crawling noise, she makes her way right into the lab, catching Kirsch red-handed messing around with the eggs. That's when she hears it clearer than ever, these raw gut-wrenching screams. But they ain't coming from the shell itself. Nah, they're coming straight out of the embryo inside. Arthur steps in, promising her they're gonna figure out immediately what it was she heard so they can put a stop to it. But Wendy and Cavalier both shoot the idea down without hesitation. The so-called genius lays it out. They can't interfere with the learning process because Wendy just proves she's able to hear something that sounds like a whole other alien language. Instead of being scared, Wendy admits she feels like somehow these creatures chose her, and in return, almost like she owes them something, she declares she wants to keep listening to their voices. Sticking to the orders, Arthur kicks off the experiments, slowly cranking up the frequency in Wendy's ears. When it hits 20,000 hertz, she claims she hears something faint but real, but as the frequency climbs higher, the sound grows harsher, pounding louder and sharper until it turns into this piercing pain that's almost unbearable. Seeing this, Cavalier turns his gaze toward Curly, asking if she hears it too, but without even blinking, the girl shakes her head and makes it clear she don't hear a damn thing. That's when Cavalier locks all his focus on Wendy, asking her straight up to find a way to bend the frequency so everybody else in the room can hear it too. Wendy hesitates, shaking her head, convinced that what he's demanding is impossible. But Cavalier pushes back, reminding her that once before she already tweaked tech instinctively. She managed to use it to communicate with her brother without even realizing it. Holding on to that thought, Wendy lets her memories guide her and starts experimenting with her own throat. Slowly, she manages to push out a sound until finally she nails it, replicating the exact same tone the aliens had produced. The result hits the whole room like a shockwave. Everyone feels it in their bones, this eerie mix of awe and fear. The one who looks the most thrilled, no doubt, is Cavalier. With his smug grin, he turns to Curly and points out that learning French could never stack up against speaking an alien tongue naturally, the way Wendy just pulled it off. Seconds later, Joe steps forward, voice steady, demanding they stop the experiment and give his sister some rest. Cavalier insists that Wendy's hybrid body is like a battery strong enough to power a whole city, but Joe refuses to see her as a machine and reminds him she's still just a fragile, frightened kid. Right away, Wendy scolds her brother for jumping in, claiming she don't need his protection, cause she can handle herself just fine. Even Arthur steps in, asking that she be given a moment to breathe. Thanks to that request, Cavalier finally eases up and pulls back for now. Still, before leaving, he makes it real clear. Curly's to keep a close eye on the siblings at all times. Once he's alone again, Cavalier turns to Adam to hear his thoughts on what just went down. Adam points out that when a species tries to open up communication, the real question to ask ain't how, but why it wants to speak in the first place. Cavalier, though, has his own take. He don't believe the aliens were trying to strike up a conversation with them at all. In his mind, they were talking strictly among themselves. Wendy just happens to be the only one who can hear that strange, otherworldly tongue. Adam then suggests they hand the xenomorphs back over to Yutani and keep pushing the hybrid project under his direct watch. Cavalier rejects the idea and instead brings Joe onto the island as an employee, ensuring he stays under close watch and control. Meanwhile, somewhere else, Wendy leads her brother into the room assigned to him. Joe, looking curious, asks if she really manages to sleep there. She gives him a faint smile, hinting that rest don't come easy in a place filled with so many shadows. She, speaking with this calm ease, admits that deep down she don't really feel the physical need to rest the way an ordinary human would. After letting that slip, Wendy locks eyes with her brother and asks if he's mad at her. Not just cause she wanted to listen to the aliens, but also cause he had to go searching for her in a cemetery before finally tracking her down again. Joe steps closer, speaking with a steady, quiet voice, explaining that his anger was never aimed at her. He was angry at Prodigy for denying both him and their father the chance to see her while she was stuck in that hospital bed. That's when Wendy realizes her brother always longed to see her, even if he just couldn't find a way to reach her. Joe goes on to remind her that back then the planet was at war, and he himself was stuck on the far side of the world, after saying that he gives her his word, almost like a vow, that from now on he ain't ever leaving her side again. The day passes with rare moments of warmth and closeness. The two of them sit watching TV together, sharing old memories and rebuilding a bond that had been scarred by distance. Meanwhile, Kirsch keeps pushing forward with his research, carefully going through the recordings of Morrow's last speech before his disappearance. With every frame he rewinds and replays, he feels like there's a hidden clue buried between the words. In it, Morrow throws a disturbingly sharp question at Slightly, when does a machine stop being just a machine? Meanwhile, Cavalier keeps himself busy reading Peter Pan, sinking deep into the pages describing Neverland, almost enchanted as he draws these eerie parallels between that island and his own, an isolated place where his vision of absolute control takes shape. At the same time, Slightly sneaks just far enough outside the compound to arrange a secret meeting with Morrow. During their exchange, he calls him out with his steady, firm tone, telling him flat out they can't call themselves real friends, cause friends don't lie. He reminds him that back then Morrow swore he was part of Prodigy. Morrow pushes back, explaining that at the time he couldn't tell if Slightly was a villain or a hero, but now, convinced they're fighting on the same side, he insists they ought to work together. He even urges Slightly to take the egg and bring it straight to him. Slightly, though, refuses without a second thought, fully aware that doing so would mean stealing from Cavalier. But Morrow counters, arguing that Prodigy had already stolen from Yutani in the first place, so reclaiming the egg ain't theft at all. It's simply taking back what rightfully belongs to them. His words hang heavy in the air, challenging Slightly's sense of loyalty and truth. Slightly keeps insisting he owes his life to Cavalier, but Morrow fires back, telling him that if he really wants to be a good man, he's gotta set the past straight and correct old mistakes. On top of that, he warns him their friendship has to stay in the shadows, cause exposing it would count as a straight-up betrayal. As a sign of trust, Morrow finally drops the mask and reveals his full name, Kumi Morrow. In return, he asks Slightly to share his own true name. At first, the hybrid resists, reminding him that he's forbidden from ever speaking it out loud on account of his nature. But little by little, Morrow persuades him, insisting that trust has to go both ways, and at last he gives in, introducing himself as Arush Singh. With this new pact sealed between them, Slightly heads back into the facility, where Kirsch is already waiting in his room. There, Kirsch points to the wall, showing him 3 figures of apes hanging side by side. He explains they stand for the Buddhist ideals that refuse to hear, speak, or see anything born of evil, but then he adds that over the years, those images have grown to carry a broader, deeper meaning tied to how mankind itself chooses to interpret silence, speech, and sight. In his eyes, they've become symbols of the choices people make every day between ignorance and awareness. So then I asked him straight up if, in the case that Kirsch ever pulled something shady, Slightly would end up ratting him out. The kid shot back without hesitation that he wouldn't. That's when Kirsch, wearing that same defiant smirk, lifts the door and throws out another question. If he himself were to hurt other people, would Slightly step in to stop him, or would he just turn a blind eye and ignore it? Before Slightly could even get a word out, Morrow cuts in, warning him to tread carefully, cause what they're doing is no casual chat. It's a real test of character. Even so, Slightly don't flinch. He speaks out clear as day, saying he'd defend his friends at any cost, no matter the danger. That answer, solid and honest, finally satisfies Kirsch, who lets him off and walks away, leaving him in peace. Meanwhile, back in the lab, darker experiments are taking place, this time using a sheep as the poor test subject. Inside a sealed chamber, they unleash what they call the eye octopus. The twisted creature senses the earthbound animal and launches at it like a frenzy. It slams the sheep violently against the walls, immobilizing it, then tears out one of its eyes, just to fuse itself inside the host. For a moment, it looks like the poor thing's dead, but seconds later, it rises again, now standing tall on 2 legs, its eyes glimmering with a strange, almost human intensity. Kirsch watches the scene with intense fascination. As he analyzes the brainwave recordings, he discovers that the hybrid sheep now possesses a markedly superior intellect. He even notices that the animal is watching them closely, as if silently assessing every single one of their movements. Intrigued, he decides to move closer, daring to confront it directly. At the same time, Adam tries to warn Cavalier that if even one of these creatures were to escape, they'd all be in serious trouble, yet Cavalier maintains the calm, collected demeanor he's known for, making it clear that any potential eventuality has already been accounted for in advance. Without hesitation, he risks opening a line of communication with the sheep, and to everyone's astonishment, the hybrid actually seems to pay attention. Meanwhile, Arthur leads Sylvia out of the laboratory, taking her to a secluded area shielded by nature where they can talk without being watched. There, he confesses his growing concerns about the direction their work is taking. He finds it unacceptable that the hybrid project was put on hold in order to focus on the study of extremely dangerous alien beings. Sylvia assures him that Prodigy can manage both projects at once, and he starts to see their true capabilities despite his unease. Arthur, however, insists that the latest records show that neither Wendy nor any of the hybrids are fully complete, not even close to 100%. What's more, he warns that Cavalier's most recent orders seem to be steering them inevitably toward a scenario of armed conflict. Sylvia, trying to calm him down, suggests that maybe it all just comes down to the usual complexities and quirks of quantum mechanics. Arthur, however, responds with a sharp, serious tone, insisting that this isn't real science. He adds that if they truly have made a mistake, the best-case scenario would be that they've only created artificial intelligences that mistakenly believe they are human. But in the worst-case scenario, he admits gravely, they may have sacrificed the lives of 6 children in vain during the process, a possibility that weighs heavily on him. With that heavy truth hanging in the air, both of them agree that they need to reevaluate the risks and strengthen all safety protocols, making sure they have a clear plan in place in case the entire project were to fail catastrophically. At that very moment, Nibs enters the room, her face lighting up with a radiant smile as she announces some joyful news. She claims to be pregnant. Arthur, taken aback, replies that this is impossible, bluntly stating that she is nothing more than a machine, which visibly hurts Nibs and leaves her offended. Sylvia, trying to calm the tense atmosphere, gently tells Nibs that she's far too young to be having a child, yet the girl insists with unwavering certainty that that very morning she woke up knowing she was pregnant, and she declares firmly that inside her body there are no metals or circuits, only a baby. Out of caution, Sylvia decides to play along for the moment and convinces Nibs to come with her to her office so they can talk more quietly and without interruptions. Once there, Nibs repeats her insistence with determination, claiming she will have a baby. Sylvia, speaking with care and gentleness, asks her how she believes children are conceived. Nibs, with innocent conviction, responds that God sends them. Sylvia tries to explain that there must be a biological, physical process between two humans of opposite sexes, but before she can go deeper, Nibs interrupts, making it clear that she understands the process perfectly, having grown up on a farm and seen it happen firsthand in animals. Still, she adds, Jesus didn't need conception to be born. Hearing this, Sylvia realizes it's necessary to talk about her new body. She then asks Nibs if she's aware that she now has a body that's completely different from the one she had before. Nibs looks at her curiously, tilting her head as if trying to understand what that truly means. Nibs responds that she understands and even feels like she has matured. Sylvia tries to explain that inside her body there's not just bones and muscles, but something far more complex and intricate. However, Nibs refuses to listen, and in a sudden violent outburst, she makes her point absolutely clear. Intimidated, Sylvia decides to keep her distance while Nibs continues rambling about the daughter she believes she will have. Trying to distract her, Sylvia asks about what happened at the towers, but the moment Nibs remembers the alien creatures, she flat out refuses to discuss it. Sylvia notes Nibs' bravery as mentioned by Curly, but Nibs refuses to discuss it, leaving Sylvia aware of her deep, lingering fear. When Sylvia reminds her the creatures are safely locked away, Nibs lashes out, but Sylvia apologizes and offers tea to calm her, which Nibs accepts, sinking into thoughts of the daughter she believes she's carrying. Sylvia watches her cautiously, unsure of what might happen next. Meanwhile, Sylvia, pretending to prepare the tea, secretly activates a distress signal, sending out a subtle call for help without Nibs noticing. She keeps her movements calm and careful, hoping Nibs won't notice anything unusual, while silently praying that someone will respond in time. Two soldiers immediately rush over, following his orders to take the hybrid to her room and secure her, while also notifying the rest of the supervisors about a level 3 incident. Later on, Joe is summoned by Adam to discuss his current situation within the company. During the meeting, Joe asks him straight out about the status of his unit, but Adam firmly warns him that this information is strictly confidential, just like everything related to Wendy. Joe responds, insisting that, to him, Wendy is still his sister Marka, since she retains her memories, her personality, and even her distinctive sense of humor. Adam, however, clarifies clarifies that this is precisely why they need him to use the intimate knowledge he possesses about her to confirm that the transition has truly been a success. Joe points out that Wendy fully believes she is his sister, but when Adam asks him directly if he himself is convinced she is still the same person, Joe falls silent. Feeling uncomfortable, he tries to leave, but Adam reminds him that as an employee of the company, he is required to answer the questions posed to him, leaving Joe with no choice but to pause and reconsider his next words. Annoyed, Joe threatens to quit, but Adam, unshaken, calmly accepts the possibility, showing that the decision doesn't intimidate him in the slightest, his expression remaining completely unreadable. However, he warns him that if he chooses to leave, his departure will be carried out via transfer in a private unit off the island, which would mean losing all contact with Wendy. On top of that, he would have to cover the cost of the artificial lung that Prodigy provided, finding the necessary resources on his own once outside. Alternatively, he can stay on the island and continue working for the company, closely monitoring his sister, in exchange for keeping his lung. At that moment, Joe confronts him with a direct question. He wants to know if they really transferred his sister's consciousness into the synthetic body, and consequently whether Wendy is truly his sister. Adam responds coldly. The first question, he says, is purely a technical and practical matter. The second, however, is an existential dilemma that separates a multi-billion-dollar business from an invention destined to fade into obscurity, challenging the very definition of identity and what it truly means to be human. Finally, Adam stares at him intently and asks whether, despite everything, he still plans to quit. After a brief moment of hesitation, Joe changes his mind and decides to stay on the island. He asks one final question, wondering when he will be able to bring his sister home fully and live free from constant uncertainty. In this situation, Adam makes it perfectly clear to him that Wendy belongs entirely to Prodigy, as she is not considered an ordinary person but a transhuman prototype. Once perfected, he explains, she will represent a real possibility of immortality, becoming the decisive next step between the animal past and the transhuman future. For that reason, he insists that under no circumstance can Joe take his sister with him. Joe, however, responds firmly, insisting that despite everything, she is still a human being. Adam refuses to accept that claim and dismisses any objections outright, showing no sign of compromise, his expression cold and unwavering. Yet not everything turns out unfavorable for Joe. Shortly afterward, he is able to reunite with Siberian and Benjamin. After a heartfelt embrace, they explain that the few survivals of the squad he once belonged to now work on that very island. It becomes clear that Cavalier has been silently observing Joe, carefully orchestrating events to manipulate him for his own strategic purposes. Later on, when Wendy goes searching for Sylvia in her office, she discovers that it was actually Cavalier who had been waiting for her all along, revealing yet another layer of the complex plans unfolding behind the scenes and hinting at the deeper manipulations still at play. With an inquisitive attitude, he asks her whether during her encounter with the xenomorph, she felt more like a pirate or like an indigenous warrior. Wendy, remaining calm, replies that she fought solely because that creature had harmed her brother. However, Cavalier ignores her answer and shifts the conversation, asking her what, in her opinion, the aliens might be saying when they communicate with one another. She admits she doesn't know for sure, though she guesses they were enraged over their eggs being violated, sensing the raw instinct and fury driving their behavior. In response, Cavalier argues that if the extraterrestrials were in the same position, they would act the same way toward humans. He asks if Joe should stay on the island with full project access, and Wendy shyly urges him to stay, wanting to preserve their bond. Cavalier, on the other hand, decides to be candid. He confesses that unlike her, he cannot stand siblings, fathers, or mothers because all of them constantly try to impose on him what he should or shouldn't do, making his life far more complicated than he wants it to be. He adds that this constant pressure has shaped the way he approaches relationships and trust, leaving him wary of relying on anyone. In contrast, he admits he envies Wendy's ability to form genuine bonds without the weight of such expectations. With an inquisitive attitude, he asks her whether during her encounter with the xenomorph, she felt more like a pirate or like an indigenous warrior. Wendy, remaining calm, replies that she fought solely because that creature had harmed her brother. However, Cavalier ignores her answer and shifts the conversation, asking her what, in her opinion, the aliens might be saying when they communicate with one another. She admits she doesn't know for sure, though she guesses they were enraged over their eggs being violated, sensing the raw instinct and fury driving their behavior. In response, Cavalier argues that if the extraterrestrials were in the same position, they would act the same way toward humans. He asks if Joe should stay on the island with full project access, and Wendy shyly urges him to stay, wanting to preserve their bond. Cavalier, on the other hand, decides to be candid. He confesses that, unlike her, he cannot stand siblings, fathers, or mothers because all of them constantly try to impose on him what he should or shouldn't do, making his life far more complicated than he wants it to be. He adds that this constant pressure has shaped the way he approaches relationships and trust, leaving him wary of relying on anyone. In contrast, he admits he envies Wendy's ability to form genuine bonds without the weight of such expectations, wishing he could experience even a fraction of that freedom himself. With no other choice, Wendy promises to put in her utmost effort and work diligently, all to ensure her brother can remain on the island. Satisfied with her response, Cavalier accepts the agreement. Later, in the laboratory, Kirsch and Toodles continue analyzing the sheep. Suddenly, in the middle of their work, the hybrid interrupts to express his desire to change his name, explaining that now, as a grown man and a scientist, he wants a real, authentic name of his own. Kirsch reminds him that Cavalier already baptized him at the time of his birth, but Toodles responds that it wasn't really a name, it was more like a kind of code. Intrigued, Kirsch asks what name he would like to have, curious to see how Toodles envisions his own identity. Toodles explains that he's given it careful thought, and inspired by famous scientists, he's decided he would like to be called Isaac in honor of Newton. While avoiding a definitive answer, Kirsch notes that the name seems fitting and suits him well, reflecting both his growing maturity and his scientific aspirations. Moments later, Slightly appears, visibly nervous. He explains that he's there because Arthur needs something from the laboratory. However, when pressed to specify exactly what it is he requires, he finds himself unable to answer, leaving an air of tension and uncertainty hanging over the room as everyone waits anxiously for clarity. Still, he manages to get out of trouble because Toodles, full of enthusiasm, invites him to join in his game during the break. Slightly, however, declines the offer, arguing that he'd rather take a walk to clear his mind and gather his thoughts. When he returns to the laboratory, Kirsch continues using the devices he implanted in Slightly, which allow him to monitor his movements and eavesdrop on his conversations from a distance. This way, he manages to follow the talk that the young man has with Morrow in a secluded spot. From the top of a hill, Slightly confesses to Morrow that there's no way to get into the laboratory to take the eggs. He warns that if he can't or won't do it, it's simply because he's not willing to betray his friends. It's then that Morrow reveals something disturbing. He's managed to contact Slightly's mother and assures him that his siblings will be arriving very soon. Siblings he desperately longs to meet, filling him with both hope and a rising sense of urgency. Hearing this, Slightly realizes that his family is in imminent danger. Distraught, he pleads for mercy and reminds Morrow that in theory they are friends. Trapped with no other options, he reluctantly agrees to help in the theft of the eggs, though he insists he has absolutely no idea how to actually carry it out, fearing the consequences if anything goes wrong. Faced with his doubt, Morrow clarifies that it won't be necessary to extract the eggs directly. Instead, Slightly will take part in a different kind of operation, the infiltration of a person from the island. He explains that if they manage to expose an ordinary human being to the proximity of the eggs, the parasite will hatch and enter their body, initiating the infiltration in a far simpler and more efficient way. The person infected by the parasite will remain unconscious for 2 full days, during which Slightly will have to take care of them. After that period, the host will awaken, although Morrow assures him that he will make sure the transition is as comfortable as possible. Still, Slightly continues to show fear at the thought of having to choose someone. That's when Morrow resorts to a more intimate approach. He has Slightly's mother send a message directly into his ears. Her maternal voice, full of warmth and tenderness, reminds him that she loves him deeply and that, along with his siblings, they talk about him every single day. Moved and strengthened by these words, Slightly finally finds the motivation he had been missing. He accepts the mission, committing himself to complete it within 24 hours, ready to risk everything if it means protecting his family. A newfound determination fills him, giving him the courage to face whatever dangers lie ahead. After this episode, and now equipped with the information he needed, Kirsch returns to the laboratory, approaching the eggs with reverence and gently caressing their translucent surfaces as if they were a sacred treasure. The following morning, we see Wendy and her brother Joe playing outside the laboratory, accompanied by Smee. In that setting, Toodles joins them and explains that throughout all those days, he has been absorbing as much information as possible in order to assist Kirsch with the research, something made easy thanks to his body, which is capable of directly downloading and retaining data almost instantly. Meanwhile, Curly takes the opportunity to ask Joe about the mysterious 5 that Cavalier often mentions. Joe explains that on the old planet, governments were originally made up of people chosen through elections. 5 powerful corporations rose from the failed system, gaining influence and tackling humanity's biggest challenges. These corporations are Prodigy, Yutani, Threshold, Dynamic, and Lynch. Joe adds, moreover, that the ship they had infiltrated originally belonged to Yutani, which explains the corporation's aggressive hostility toward them. He warns that crossing any of these powerful entities could have serious consequences, far beyond what they can imagine. The children listen intently, realizing the magnitude of the forces at play in the universe around them. In fact, they were so enraged that they demanded the intervention of the other companies to reclaim what they considered rightfully theirs. Their anger was palpable, spreading tension throughout the room and leaving everyone on edge. At that very moment, Slightly appears. Seeing Joe there, his face reflects pure indignation. Bitterly, he reminds Joe that he too has siblings and a mother. But unlike Joe, they are not on the island. Wendy, surprised by his reaction, orders him to calm down, but Slightly refuses to obey, insisting that he doesn't recognize her as his superior. Joe steps in then, pointing out that all families should be reunited reunited on the island. According to him, instead of holding funerals, they should have been celebrating real reunion parties. His words hang in the air, sparking a mix of hope and tension among everyone present. Smee nods enthusiastically and suggests demanding the right to see their families. However, both Toodles and Curly express their fear. They know opposing Cavalier could bring serious repercussions, and they admit that in a way they do enjoy life on the island. As Wendy heads to the laboratory's slightly somber and determined expression reveals he has chosen Joe as the human sacrifice, leaving the group in heavy silence. No one dares to speak, each of them fully aware of the weight of what is about to unfold. That suspicion is confirmed when, by nightfall, we see him silently spying on Kirsch from outside his room, lurking like someone waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Meanwhile, Wendy entertains herself by communicating with the embryo living inside her brother's lung, all while Kirsch watches her, witnessing how the lung seems to respond to her presence. At one point, the embryo completely breaks through the tissue and frees itself from its capsule, emerging like a small limbless xenomorph resembling a serpent. Wendy approaches to get a closer look, and instead of showing fear, she manages to communicate with the creature as if it were a pet, forming a surprising bond with it.